I'm Dana Russell with Kokopelli Real Estate and Property Management, and this is the Kokopelli Connection, where we discuss the history, happenings, and lifestyle of Western Colorado. On this episode of the Kokopelli Connection, we spoke with Dave Fishell, who is a local historian. He is an author of many historical books about the Western Slope history. He hosts a historical radio show. He has done numerous documentaries about the Western Slope and its history, and also volunteers at the museum. He took us back to the very beginnings of Grand Junction. And because it was spring break, our kids were also able to join us for this episode. We began with the Native Americans that first settled in this valley. We then moved to the formation of Grand Junction as a town. Did you know that Grand Junction was not originally named Grand Junction? In this podcast, you'll find out the original name of Grand Junction, along with Palisade's original name and Fruita's original name. We touched on the topics such as Butch Cassidy, the uranium era, and how the Manhattan Project had ties to Grand Junction. Did you know that you can still see remnants of the machine gun nests that were used to guard the Manhattan Project grounds here in Junction? We talked about those mysterious shacks that sit alongside Monument Road, and that an atomic bomb was used in Rulison. Can you believe that? An atomic bomb was used on the Western Slope. Find out what other big project they considered using nuclear energy for in this episode. This episode is filled with historical facts and stories about the Grand Valley. Let's jump into it. Our family loves history. We love Indian ruins, history in general, so we're very excited to talk to you about this podcast. So let's just start with the history of the Grand Valley. Let's start all the way back in the beginning from...
probably the first noticeable remnants of a civilization were the Fremonts. And they were here, there's some variation, but probably about 800, 900 AD to maybe about 1250, 1300 AD, give or take a little bit. And I'm not a full-blown archaeologist, so, but they left a lot of the rock art that we see. There's more rock art than people realize. Up in the Colorado National Monument, there's some. Mm-hmm. The Palisade Plunge bicycle trail goes by some.
Yep.
And there's two different kinds, just so people know. If it's carved, it's a petroglyph. If it's painted, it's a pictograph.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The problem we have, not maybe as much here, but just in general in western Colorado and eastern Utah, is the vandalism. Mm-hmm. People shoot at it. People, carve their names over the top of it. There was a pretty bad case just in the last few weeks or month outside of Green River, Utah, where somebody carved, I don't know if it was a lady who did it or somebody used a lady's name over a pretty much untouched 850, 900 AD panel. And it was carved. So
that's too bad.
Yeah, so that's primarily why you don't see or hear a lot of it. Most of it's on public land, either Park Service or Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management land, but there's a lot more than people realize. But it's hard to get to, by and large. There's a few sections in the monument that you can walk to on the trails. We were just talking about Thompson Springs, Utah and Sago. That's a pretty well-known panel.
Yeah.
That had been vandalized a couple of times, but they were able to get some National Park Service rock art experts to scrape paint off of it quite a few years ago. So
that's interesting.
That's been pretty much original. So,
okay.
But they were here. They about roughly the same time. People are probably more familiar with the. We're not supposed to say Anasazi. We're supposed to say ancestral Puebloans. That's Anasazi, according to the Hopi and the Pueblo tribes, means ancient enemy. Mm-hmm. And they've been trying to get people to change that terminology for quite a few years, and that's finally coming into practice a little bit. But about the same time that group was in the cliff dwellings, we had the Fremonts more up here in western Colorado and eastern Utah.
So how, just for context, are those the same kind of people that built Mesa Verde?
No, different.
Okay.
Yeah. Excuse me. There was some overlap. Again, I'm not a full-blown archaeologist, but the Fremonts were not nearly as prone to build great cliff dwellings.
Okay.
Up around here, there's a few places on Glade Park where a little bit of their pit houses were located. And they did a few small little stone-style structures, but real big difference in archaeology, technology, building-wise, between the Anasazi ancestral Puebloans and the Fremont. And they're called Fremont for a pretty odd reason. An archaeologist in the 1920s was working around today's Hanksville, Utah. He came across this untouched area, and at first he thought he had another Anasazi ancestral Puebloan site. But the more he worked on it, he realized it was different. Different remnants, different structures, different construction style. Since he was right next to the Fremont River, or close to the Fremont River, he named the civilization Fremont.
Oh, okay.
And John Charles Fremont, who had the river named after him, was called the Pathfinder of the West, and he wandered all over lots of western areas for scouting and map-making expeditions, and he probably wasn't a real good fan of Native Americans, so kind of too bad they got stuck with his name. So anyway, that's how we got Fremonts.
So how big were those communities?
Not very big, especially compared to what you see at places like Hovenweep or Mesa Verde, pretty small. There's a few places around Rangeley, a few places in Dinosaur National Monument where they had a few families, but nothing on the scale of Mesa Verde.
It would be so interesting to be able to go back in time and see what the Grand Valley looked like at that time, because now, you have irrigation, which makes everything so green. Yeah. You have all the development. It would be so interesting to see what they came across when they got into the Grand Valley.
Yeah. Probably there's hints in the early newspapers about people finding things in what is today's Colorado National Monument and the Uncompahgre Plateau and things like that. But back then, the Native American Indian sentiment was so strong that probably things didn't get saved much at all. So, but there's like a 1883, 84 newspaper article talks about people finding some skeletons in what is now the monument. But who knows? Whatever happened to them.
Right. Yeah. What was their lifestyle like? Were they?
They did some hunting. Okay. With the atlatl, I'll get it stated right. Atlatl is a spear-like device. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, we've been to the Edge of the Cedars.
Good. Okay.
In Blanding. Boy, that is a fascinating museum. Yeah.
Well, you know more than I do then.
Well, I don't think so.
That's a great museum.
It is.
Yeah. So that museum, I think, is mostly Fremont. It's been quite a while since I've been there, but I think that was the Fremont main area in eastern and southeastern Utah. But they did a little bit of hunting. I don't know if they did a lot of big game hunting. I'm not, again, an archaeologist, so I'm not up on all that. But they grew some crops, again, pretty small scale, compared to what you would have seen at Mesa Verde.
Okay. So you said that they were here up until 1200?
Give or take.
Did you say
1250?
Okay. So they really wouldn't have had any interactions with any type of settlers.
No.
So tell us when settlers started to come to this area.
The next step would be the Utes.
Okay.
They had been here in most of Colorado and eastern Utah and all the way up into southern Wyoming and a little bit of northern New Mexico, and their hunting grounds went all the way into what is today's panhandle of Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
Out on the plains. So they roamed around quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And they may have been one of the first, or maybe the first, again, depending on who you talk to and what books you read, to get horses out of all the plains tribes. When the Spanish started coming in the 1550, give or take a few years, 1600 time frame, they either traded for horses from the Spanish explorers and a few farmers up in northern New Mexico, or maybe they just flat out stole them. That happened some too. So they're around. Excuse me, I'm clearing my voice here. They were not in the valley proper, the Grand Valley, very much. Today, if you go west, like you're going to Utah, go south like you're going to Delta, that's pretty much what the valley originally looked like without irrigation.
Yeah.
It was a little better climate. It was more moist, more rainfall. But if you had your choice of being in the valley proper, and you had a lot of horses, and you had to feed your family, there wasn't as much game down here. There wasn't as much forage for your animals. So you'd rather be up on today's Grand Mesa. Mm-hmm. You'd rather be up on the Uncompahgre Plateau or Glade Park, or, a lot higher elevation, more pleasant climate than down here in the desert.
Yeah. And remind me, Chief Uray.
Yeah.
And
Chipeta.
Okay.
The big transformation point for western Colorado was the so-called Meeker Massacre. Mm-hmm. Massacre is kind of a loose term that's going out of style, but the Ute Agency near today's town of Meeker, a guy by the name of Nathan Meeker, wanted to force the Utes into farming. And he, a whole variety of different things we don't have time to get into, but he eventually got the Utes up there at the White River Agency angry at him, and they murdered him and about 11 employees, and that was September of 1879. Most of central and eastern Colorado had already been settled by that time. And people like Governor Pitkin, the editor of the Rocky Mountain News, they were still upset that this central section of Colorado was still Ute Indian territory. So when that happened, that was the last blow. Rocky Mountain News front page article said, let's get rid of the last Utes. Let's kill them all. Let's kill the women and children. If we can't move them out of here. And Pitkin was real pro, moving them out or getting rid of them for whatever means necessary. Yeah. So 1879 was the final act, so to speak. 1880, the treaties were whittled down, and Utes were supposed to be either moved to reservations down in southern Colorado or what is now the Uinta-Uray Reservation up by today's Vernal, Utah. Okay. So most of them went out. They were supposed to be out by the summer of 1881. You weren't supposed to come in here and start a farm or a town site or a ranch until the spring of 1882. People came in here illegally. And the Fort Crawford, which was 10 miles south of today's town of Montrose, the soldiers actually patrolled the valley a little bit. Oh. And they caught a few people illegally trespassing up here. And we think a couple of individuals, 3 individuals, may have laid out a ranch site near today's Mesa Mall illegally in 1881, before they were supposed to. Huh. The troops caught them, moved them back to the fort. The fort commander said, don't do that again, and let them go. Well, they came back. And this time they caught them and put them in the fort jail down there and didn't release them until I think about 6 weeks later. So people already had an idea of what the valley looked like, or a few people did.
Yeah.
The treaty said you weren't supposed to come in here and start a town, start a farm, start a ranch until late spring of 1882. People just ignored that. Nobody paid much attention to it. The troops, after people started coming in here, just kind of let them go. And the two big jumping off points were Gunnison. Gunnison was right on the reservation, old reservation line.
Okay.
And people kind of started to gather there. And then more people than folks might realize were in Utah waiting to come east into the valley. Because Utah had already been somewhat settled. We were kind of one of the last areas in the whole Rocky Mountain West, this west central section of Colorado to be settled. So Denver already had 25,000 people, when we had 10. So anyway, so that's how it got started. George Crawford, who was our main town founder, Grand Junction's town founder, had started some towns in Kansas. He was kind of a semi-pro town builder, real estate salesman.
Okay.
He was in Gunnison, waiting to jump into this area. He had talked to a couple of people, maybe the same individuals who had illegally been in here, about the valley. And again, we'd had surveyors come through here. Railroad surveyors, John Charles Fremont, Captain John Gunnison, a lot of people like that. So it wasn't completely known. It was mapped out in a few areas.
Yeah.
And the junction of the two rivers was particularly attractive. I'm going to take a drink here.
What animals did they hunt?
Down here, there wasn't a whole lot, just like today. You see antelope. If you go out in the desert, do you see antelope? Have you seen antelope? Yeah. They were around. Bighorn sheep were around. They, were gone for quite a few decades until they were reintroduced in the 1980s. But they did that. But up on the Grand Mesa, all the deer and elk, they would hunt some rabbits, some small game, turkeys, things like that, wild animals. But they would have to, the Utes would use bow and arrow, but you'd have to have a pretty strong bow to, get an elk, But then when they first white American settlers came in, they had rifles, and there were no game laws, and that was a big problem, economic event. We had some market hunters, places like Leadville, Colorado, and the mining towns of Silverton and Ouray were already established before anybody was living here, and they wanted meat. So we'd have some guys go up and shoot 10 or 15 deer in a day, or, 10 elk in a day. And they'd do that for a whole week until they got a wagon load of meat, and then they'd go sell it at some of the mining towns, and they made money doing that. So that was a problem because it wasn't too long, over about 25, 30 years, a lot of those animals were pretty much gone because they got overhunted. So, depending on, what time frame you're talking about. But by the early 1900s, people, were saying, oh, we saw a deer. Oh, we saw an elk. Oh, we haven't seen any bighorn sheep. Well, it's because they got all hunted out.
Who named who named the Rocky Mountains?
Wow. The first name, when this was still part of, let me think a minute, part of Spain or part of the Louisiana Purchase on the plains and the Continental Divide to the east of us, the first surveyors called them the Shining Mountains, because as they were coming across the plains from places like today's Kansas or Nebraska, they were seeing the mountains in the morning sun, and they called them the Shining Mountains. I guess I don't know. who call them the Rocky Mountains. You see that term, I've never seen where that was, given to somebody's credit. I don't know. Good question.
And then who named Grand Junction?
Well, I'll get to that in a minute. There's 5 Grand Junctions in the country. There's a real tiny little burg in Mississippi. There's a bigger town of 10,000 or so in Tennessee. There's a town of a few hundred in Michigan. And then there's a town of a few hundred in Iowa. All those Grand Junctions were, and the one in Tennessee still are, railroad junctions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting.
So that's why they were called Grand Junction. We're the only natural Grand Junction. 2 rivers.
Mm-hmm.
The Grand was not called the Colorado until 1922. So it was the junction of the Grand and the Gunnison. And when they first discussed what to name the town, some people said, why don't we name it Crawford, after George Crawford, the town founder. He didn't want that. One guy said, supposedly, this is a legend, after he took a cup of water and drank it right out of the river, he said, why don't we call it Belly Ache Flats? Which I kind of like. Can't you imagine big signs on I-70? Next exit, Bellyache Flats. Wouldn't it be?
Yeah. Sounds like an attractive place to go.
Yeah. And there was several other, somebody wanted to call it West Denver, which I'm glad we didn't get West Denver.
Yep.
There was other possibilities. The first 4 weeks or so of mail service was addressed to Ute, Colorado. And that didn't stay in effect because Aspen's first name was Ute City, Colorado.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and they still have quite a few decades, they had a real high-end restaurant still called Ute City Eatery or whatever the name. But George Crawford, again, the town founder, really pushed for Grand Junction from the junction of the 2 rivers, which is right off of the 5th Street Bridge there. That's why it's called Grand Junction.
And then what year did it become a city?
The first people came in here illegally when it was still Ute territory in the first week of September of 1881. The town didn't get incorporated as a full-fledged city until 1883, within a few months of the county being established, being taken out of Gunnison County. Montrose, Delta, Mesa County were all originally part of Gunnison County. And that's kind of confused people and me in a few cases, we're trying to trace back some history. There's a big shootout with some outlaws near Whitewater, for example, and I tried to figure out what happened because there was a Gunnison County sheriff involved. Well, you got to go back to Gunnison and go through the court records, and a lot of times they didn't have, today's Mesa County, records to go back on, but we were part of a huge county originally.
Was Kokopelli a tribe?
Kokopelli is I don't know if it's, boy, you got me there. I think it's Fremont, the rock art. You see it all over, more in Utah, but there's a few around here. It's mostly painting or pictograph. I've seen small ones. There's a couple places in Utah where there's some about 3 feet high. So he was supposedly a seed carrier. He went to fertilize either other tribe members or even planting. There's some variation on the story. We weren't around to ask him, what he was doing.
So with this, being back in the 1800s with the early settlers, tell us a little bit about the environment. Was it like the Wild West? Butch Cassidy's known to be around in these areas. How did that go back then?
If you go to today's Fruita State Welcome Center, there's a big stone out there that's
Yes.
pretty incorrect. That stone says he came through the Grand. He was around. That marker says he came through here, possibly came through here after the Telluride robbery. Well, that's not true, because other people who were in the robbery with him later wrote, 2 of them out of the 4, were there 4 guys, I think, wrote their life stories in books. The last remaining one was ended up as a constable in Price, Utah in the 1930s. And they're pretty consistent on, after they robbed that bank in summer of 1889, they went over to the Dolores area, and then down around the LaSalle Mountains, and then came back up through Moab on that direction. I don't think they came through here.
Okay.
We've had a real major difference of opinion, and some of us would like to get that rock taken out, but the unusual group that paid for it, it's their stone. So anyway, we had some activity. We had some bad guys. By and large, when we do elementary school talks and I do museum tours, there's a little store front saloon exhibit in the museum, and we talk about how Hollywood and TV and everything really glorify Western violence and saloon shootouts. And that did happen on a small scale. Here in Colorado, you have places like Silverton, who were pretty violent for a couple of years during their big boom years. Probably one of the worst places was Leadville. Leadville at its peak had 30,000 people in it, and that had a lot of saloons and a lot of things. And that was Doc Holliday's last shootout. To give you some idea of how reality really worked in his case. Last time he tried to shoot somebody, it was about I don't remember the exact date, early 1880s. He was about 10 feet away from a guy, and they were shooting at each other inside a saloon. And they both missed. That's pretty typical. And I shoot quite a bit, so I know how difficult it can be. But anyway, that didn't happen very often. Here in a place like Grand Junction or Fruita or Palisade, that was rare. Probably per capita today, we might have a little bit more crime, but it's hard to say because it wasn't reported.
Right.
For example, probably the 2 big events kind of regionally were a train robbery that happened between here and Whitewater in the early 1880s, and then the 1904 parachute train robbery, which was Kid Curry, one of Butch Cassidy's cohorts, involved in that. Neither one was reported very widely. For a couple of days, it took a while for the newspapers to get coverage. And then, just like today, if you have a bank robbery anywhere, or most anywhere in the nation, the bank and the police quite often will not say how much was taken in the robbery, because that information might, if it's revealed by a robber or somebody, that might give them a lead on who was involved.
Yeah.
And for quite a few years, we weren't sure what happened with this parachute train robbery. And come to find out, they may have robbed the wrong train. When the train went through on the Colorado, or the safe went through from the Denver Mint on the Colorado Midland train, Kid Curry may have been at the parachute station and watched that train leave. And then when the train from the Denver Rio Grande came through a short time later, that's the train he jumped on. That's the train they stopped 2.5 miles outside of town, right off of today's I-70. And that's the train they blew the safe to smithereens on. And that's a safe that we think was pretty much empty.
Oh, okay.
So those kind of things happen.
Yeah.
Butch Cassidy was around. We know he was in places like Browns Park, Browns Hole. His buddies The McCartys robbed the bank in Delta. So those things happened. He's pretty well known primarily because of the Paul Newman, Robert Redford movie. We get asked about that, quite a bit. So, but I can't say he was actually here. In the valley.
Yeah.
But it's probable he passed through going different ways because he was around for, there's one legend, I should back that up, that he was actually working on a Glade Park cattle ranch for a short time, but there's no way to prove that. But he did move around. He did a lot of cowboying. He was down in the Four Corners area for a while. So who knows?
That museum over in Silverton, along with the cemetery, is also a really really neat museum. We find that very interesting to walk through the cemetery and read all the tombstones. Yes. You get a lot of history just reading from those tombstones. It's pretty.
Yeah, that was a pretty wild town.
Yeah. And if I'm correct, I believe they have a book that is also associated with the cemetery, telling more stories about who's buried there.
We do cemetery tours here.
Oh, do you?
Oh, yeah. Talk about the crooked police chief from the. We had. I got to be careful what I say, because they're still relatives in town. We had a little more problems with crime in the 1930s during the Depression because we had a crooked police chief and a crooked district attorney.
Oh.
And they were taking payoffs from ladies of the night and gambling halls, which were pretty prevalent at the time.
Oh, interesting.
But we won't go into detail.
Yeah.
But when we do a cemetery tour, we talk about that.
So speaking of the Depression era, just when the town of Grand Junction was incorporated, kind of leading up to the Depression era, what are some of the hardships that people had to go through in the Grand Valley?
We had problems even before what's called the Great Depression happened. Agriculture was on its downslide. The Holly sugar beet factory down here at Los Colonias had closed down because the soil around here was not as good for growing sugar beets because of the high alkaline content, and a lot more sugar beets were coming out of Delta and Montrose counties. So Holly had closed that plant down and built a new one at Delta. So things were not doing real well in the mid and late 1920s here locally. But then when the major Depression era started, it was pretty difficult. Old 6 and 50 going out west of Fruita and Loa and Mac, that was used quite a bit for farmers and families from Oklahoma from the Dust Bowl days, eastern Colorado, going to California, going to Oregon, things like that. And for quite a few years up until the 1970s, early 1980s, there were still little pieces of old 1930s cars out there and, things like that. And an old State Line store, which had some interesting crime in the 30s as well. Last little outpost of civilization in Colorado before he hit the Utah border, before he got to Cisco.
Okay.
So that happened some. We had some different people try different crops. Potatoes had a short span. Sugar beets came back in a little bit, especially after towards the start of World War II. But it was just kind of a hit and miss proposition, and that's partly why, again, the kind of crime was a little more prevalent because so many people were down and out. We had at the Avalon Theater, starting in the late 1920s, the Daily Sentinel's office was originally right across the street from this theater. And Al Look, who was a longtime reporter, columnist, and kind of an amateur historian, wrote books. He was looking out the office window one day and he saw all these kids and their mom dads were out looking for work, lining up for a free soup at the Avalon. And he wondered how many were having a Christmas. And they started what was called for, I think about 20 years, the Soup Eaters Christmas. And they had different organizations like the Lions Club and Kiwanis and Rotary. And we had a big YMCA building down where the bank building is now.
You don't see too many YMCAs
out
here, no.
And ours never made any money. That was a big problem. That really hit again during the 30s. It was really on its last legs. But anyway, also we had the Civilian Conservation Corps workers up in the monument. They were primarily young single men making $1 a day. They would come down and do exhibition boxing matches. And that was a fundraiser for the Soup Eaters.
Oh.
So every Christmas, they'd have this free Christmas meal, free presents for everybody in the family, and a free showing of whatever the current movie was at the Avalon. And that was a real big event that went on for 20-some years down there. And we got people would donate toys. Sometimes they needed repair. We have pictures of this huge area in the back of the theater where people are working on fixing the toys and, reworking the dolls and reworking the rocking horses and kids holding their toys. First time they had a present for Christmas.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal. But that's kind of how economic conditions were, for the 30s.
What were some of the economic drivers in the Grand Valley?
There was a little bit of mining. Radium, we'll get into the uranium era. Radium started to be looked at a little bit in the early teens. Again, Madame Curie with her work, and she used some Colorado ore, but probably not here. It may have come from the Blackhawk, Central City area. There was a couple of small mines there. We run into people say, "Oh, my great-grandma, great-grandpa, had this little French lady out at the mine out of, Montrose or Paradox Valley or somewhere." Well, there's pretty good records of where Madame Curie went, and we're pretty sure she wasn't here. But there was a French lady that was associated with her husband, who was a geologist at a copper mine out of bedrock. So we think that may be why there's confusion. But anyway, radium started to be looked at for medicine. There was radium cough syrup, radium hair tonic. It's just amazing amount of stuff that people didn't realize was killing you. Yeah.
I didn't know that they actually used it for medicine.
Oh, yeah. Huh. They'd actually, up in Montana for quite a few years, they had a radium mine. You could go sit in a bench in the mine, and that would heal you.
Oh.
Yeah. So we had radium coming off the Uncompahgre Plateau above Gateway for quite a few years. It was several $100s an ounce taken by mule to Whitewater, where then it was shipped out by railroad to refineries back in east where they made the watch dials that glow in the dark. Yeah.
Okay.
So that came from here. A lot of it came from here. Then they realized the same mines were producing vanadium or similar ore bodies, and vanadium was used to strengthen steel. And Germany had started to do that during World War I. Well, we had a lot of vanadium, and nobody really realized it until they started going back over some of these radium mines.
Oh.
Excuse me. So that came out. And then getting into the late 30s, as it looked like there was more war on their horizon, people realized we had uranium. And by 1943, we had part of the top secret Manhattan project here down at the Log Cabin Museum down at the DOE site on the Gunnison River on the other side of the Orchard Mesa Cemetery. That was top secret. Several hundred people employed here. Nobody's supposed to talk about it, let anybody know. There were still machine gun bunkers, remnants of them, if you know where to look around the cemetery, overlooking the site down there on the Gunnison River.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So for quite a few years, we shipped out uranium.
Mm-hmm.
Then at the end of the war, it looked like there wasn't going to be any call for it. Then we get into the Cold War, and that like doubled, tripled
Oh, really?
the increase in what the the Atomic Energy Commission eventually became the Department of Energy,
Mm-hmm.
and then the U.S. Army, Air Force, Department of Defense wanted more uranium, and at one time we had 50,000 pounds here.
Wow.
One of three major stockpiles. One was at Hanford, Washington. The other one was at Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Okay.
And then Grand Junction, Colorado.
Hmm.
So we could have bombed the planet to smithereens if it ever got turned into bombs, just with our stockpile.
Huh.
Yeah. So then it was such a big boom in the 50s. And that's where we got the globe willow trees, the big kind of rounded trees that, unfortunately or fortunately, I have one in my front yard. And there was such a big push for new housing
Mm-hmm.
in the 50s and a push for shade trees. Globe willows are not natural, except maybe on a riverbank.
Okay.
And these big, I get asked that once in a while from out-of-state visitors, who goes and trims those trees in that nice rounded... No, it is grow that way. Anyway, but somebody brought globe willows in from, I don't know where, back east, and now they're all over the place. But a lot of interesting little side effects that you don't realize from the uranium boom.
Yeah.
So many people were coming to Grand Junction, coming to Moab, coming to Durango. Life magazine in 1953 ran a several page article about how you could go to Grand Junction with your family and become multimillionaires in a few weeks with your own uranium mine. And they had mom and dad dressed up in coveralls and hard hats, posing in front of a Jeep, and with fake cliffs in the background. It's a studio in New York City. It's not even here.
Oh.
They did include some aerial shots of the monument in the article, but they got Geiger counters, and I mean, mom and dad are out there supposedly, finding uranium, so that just fueled more people coming here to look for uranium. We had so many places in downtown selling Geiger counters, selling crude metal detectors, selling dynamite. You could go to Woolworths down at 5th and Main, order your cheeseburger. While you're getting your cheeseburger finished, they'd go downstairs and get you a box of dynamite.
Oh, gosh.
And bring it back up, and blasting cat, whatever you needed. We had lumber yards selling all this stuff. We had so much dynamite in downtown Grand Junction that they're still on the way to the Grand Junction entrance of the monument. There's still about 3 stone little structures, little bunkers. Well, when they found the fire chief at that era, when they found out how much dynamite was sitting down on Main Street in downtown in general, they said, well, this is too dangerous. So move it out somewhere. And in the 1950s, that was way out of town.
Right, yeah.
Nobody lived out there.
Yeah.
So that's where they had to store their dynamite, and the businesses could only keep 24 hours worth of sales of dynamite in their establishment. Then they had to go back out and get more. But there's still about 3, I think, of those little bunkers. And originally there was 11 out there.
Are those the ones along Monument Road
Yeah.
that you see as you're driving from town to the monument?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when they redid the road here about 20 years ago, CDOT called me up and said, oh, we found out those bunkers are from the Civilian Conservation Corps work when they were blasting, for the Rimrock Drive. And I said, no, there's a lot of legend, a lot of crossover, but no, we know where they kept their dynamite. They kept their dynamite up there because 2 or 3 came close to getting blown up when they were working on that road. But anyway, that was, it was.
So was there dynamite still in there?
Oh, yeah. As late as the 70s, some of it was pretty sealed up. And I don't remember who told me they knew somebody who was, when they started to build out that way, they broke one open and here's some pretty crumbly old, sticks of dynamite.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I'm glad nobody got into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh, that's interesting.
So when and why did they make the new I-70 into Utah?
Well, originally I-70 was not supposed to be here. It was supposed to stop at Denver and not come over the mountains. And Governor Johnson, it's the Eisenhower-Johnson Tunnel up there, he was good friends with President Eisenhower. He'd actually served with Eisenhower when Eisenhower was a general in World War II. And when he became governor, Eisenhower was president of the U.S., and they were just starting to build the interstate system. And Johnson was upset when he saw a map, and I-70 stopped right there at Denver. And he worked on his buddy Eisenhower, and they eventually got, the freeway mapped out. It didn't get built for quite a couple of decades. But that's why it originally came out this way, because our governor, who was a Western Slope boy from up around Hayden, got the president to push it. And originally, the tunnels, there was some talk we had enough leftover atomic bombs, weapons from the 50s and the 60s. There was some talk about using an atomic bomb like device to blast open those tunnels, which would have been pretty exciting. And fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and it didn't happen. But they used atomic energy for a lot of different things. They tried it for mining up around Rulison. I don't know if you know about the Rulison blast. Oh, they kind of between Rulison and Parachute up on the Battlement Mesa area. They found out there's a big, huge underground reservoir of natural gas, I don't remember, thousands of feet down. So in 1969, they decided to use an atomic bomb device, lowered down, drilled a hole down at 3,000 feet, and let that thing go. And they told people when it was going to go, and so they'd be aware of this blast. And it shook quite a big area around Rifle and Debec in that area, and Rulison, Parachute. So if you already had a broken window in your house, you just waited for the blast, and then you turn it over to the Department of Energy. Oh, the blast broke my window. They had quite a few things like that. But people said, well, if you use, atomic energy to get this gas, isn't it going to be radioactive when it comes back out? And all the experts said no. Well, the first time they got it up, it was so full of radioactivity they couldn't use it. So now up there at 10,000 feet, there's a nice little brass plaque where the Rulison blast took off. So I've been up there on horseback a couple times. Pretty hard to reach even now.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Not even a real good four-wheel drive road. Knock your teeth out. Am I talking too much?
No, you're doing great.
How many people came when the first people came?
How many people what?
How many people came when the first people came to America?
America or Grand Junction?
Grand Junction.
The first winter here in 1881, we had about 200, 300. So to give you some idea, the high schools probably have more students today, than we had the first year or so in Grand Junction. So it wasn't until the railroad came in 1882 that really helped people come to Grand Junction, because all of a sudden you didn't have to come here by stagecoach or covered wagon or things like that. You could actually buy a train ticket from Denver. It took you 2 days by train to get here to Grand Junction, but we were on the railroad between Denver and Salt Lake City. So that really helped the town grow. But the first year it was pretty sparse, pretty difficult to reach.
What is that chimney that you can see along I-70 as you...
Oh, in Debec Canyon.
Yeah.
Oh, that's part, well, that actual chimney is from a 1930s ranch.
Oh, okay.
But the ROAN, Roan Creek toll road, because Roan Creek comes down through Debec and hits the river, that was put in by Henry Roan, R-H-O-N-E. No relationship in the Roans. And he built that with, in fact, he had real trouble getting it financed. But most of it was on where the railroad is now. But you can see some of it, going up and down. And right about where that chimney is where Armand Debec, who was one of the sons of the town founder, and was still around in the 1980s, he told me that's about where his dad, Dr. Debec, had a gate for the toll road. And we don't think there was a building there. We think somebody was just stationed there putting that gate up and down because that was such a skinny little area. You couldn't turn around, and go back either direction.
Yeah.
So what you see there, and I've hiked over to it a couple times when I was younger and 50 pounds lighter, it's more modern, great metal, I don't know, what's the bottom of the word, the fireplace area. It's not real, it's 1930s.
Yeah. And
that coincides with what I was told construction-wise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the toll road was there. And then let me back up. Our original railroad from Denver, Salida, Gunnison, Montrose, Delta, Grand Junction, on to Salt Lake City was narrow gauge. Narrow gauge is 3 feet in width. So that helped being on that main line. But what really helped was in 1889, the standard gauge line came down from Glenwood, Newcastle, Rifle, Debec. So all of a sudden we're on 2 railroad lines.
Okay.
And that standard gauge is 4 feet, 8 1/2 inch. So why is it 4 feet, 8 1/2 inch?
Do you know?
No, I have no idea.
It's 2 horse butts wide.
Oh.
When they first started a real crude railroad type construction in England with wooden wheels, they put wooden tracks down where the Roman chariots and wheel vehicles went. And those Roman vehicles were pulled by 2 horses. So 2 horses wide on average was 4 feet, 8 1/2 inch. So when they started actually having a steam-powered railroad in England, they followed the same route and put steel or metal rails down. So when railroads came to the United States, they did the same thing, 4 feet, 8 1/2 inch.
Huh.
And then also, how did horses change?
By and large, on a stagecoach, if you could do about 25 miles, but that was hard to do in the mountains. We have a real good story of a lady who was traveling to Gunnison by stagecoach, and the stagecoach had 10 people inside the stage and 8 people on the roof, and they changed horses about every 10 or 15 miles because they were going up over roughly what is today's Monarch Pass area, trying to get to Gunnison, and the stagecoach tipped over and knocked the people off the roof. So that's, pretty difficult. But they try to change horses more often in the mountains, but sometimes you couldn't get a place to have horses stabled, to change, have a stage station.
How many was Grand Junction called Grand Junction when mail started to come around?
Well, the first letters, in fact, this is a real collector's item. If you're a stamp, collector, if you can find a letter envelope that says Ute, so-and-so, Ute, Colorado, man, that's really valuable. I've only seen a photograph of one. I've never actually seen one. But even an early day Grand Junction one, which would have been late August, early September of 1881, when they started addressing letters to Grand Junction, Colorado. But even now, once in a while, somebody will, I don't know recently, but a while back, I had a friend at the post office, and they'd still get a letter from addressed to Grand Junction, but they don't say Colorado, and they don't know if it's going to Iowa or Michigan or Tennessee or whatever. What are the other Grand Junctions? So, but yeah, Ute for 3 or 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I don't know exactly, but that's our original name. But people weren't too. There's several stories, but people weren't too fond of the Utes at first, so that was one reason it didn't stay.
Can you tell us a little bit about, going back to uranium, tell us a little bit about why people have to do uranium, pull the uranium report for real estate? Why are there mill tailings all over the city?
The big mill here locally, out of several mill sites in western Colorado and eastern Utah, this was one of the biggest ones down there. The old sugar beet factory, which had been empty for quite a few years, was then converted to a uranium mill. And then when they let me think a minute. The west side of that building is where their tailings pile from processing uranium from, when did they do that? From the 50s, I think, to about 69 or 70, give or take a year. So they had a huge pile already there from the processing. Then people in the late 60s, early 70s, I shouldn't say people, but state and local governments, federal government said maybe this isn't the safest, item to have around. Well, people had been told when even when the mill was operating, but especially when it was closed, that was just free fill. You could, use it for, building your house on top of, for putting underneath your new driveway pavement. All of originally downtown Grand Junction, when that was rebuilt in the 1960 to 62 era and put the curves in for Operation Foresight, all those sidewalks were put on top of mill tailings. Most of the original road of US 50 from Grand Junction to Whitewater to Delta was built on top of tailings. So it's just, all over the place.
Yeah.
And nobody really thought about it. Families that lived down in that part of town, I've had a lot of people tell me how when they were small, they'd go up there and play in the tailings pile. Nobody thought knew about it. Yeah. So then by about 1970, don't quote me on the exact year, but roughly give or take a year or two, they decided maybe that wasn't the safest stuff to give away. And then by the late 70s, early 80s, there were more studies that maybe we ought to get rid of it from the area. Mm-hmm. That took a while. They had congressional hearings. Some people thought it was needed. Some people thought, why waste money doing it? Give you ideas on some thoughts. A long time, La Plata County Commissioner in Durango had a big mill. He thought the whole thing was just a waste of time and money. And when they had congressional hearings, regional hearings in Denver and then one down in Durango, he'd show up in front of the folks conducting the hearing and said, I mined uranium most of my life, and I'm 80 years old or something like that, never hurt me. And at least once in front of the people holding the hearing, he'd actually eat a spoonful of tailings.
Oh, gosh.
And he lived to be in his 90s, so anyway.
He was well preserved.
I guess so. The other thing is, we have a lot of pictures. The museum, we're still buddies. I do some work there. You never see a photo of a uranium mill worker or a miner who isn't smoking. So the combination of the two, and early on in the uranium boom, 2 or 3 people in the Atomic Energy Commission said we need to have better ventilation in these mines to lower the chances of cancer. Well, the mine owners, the big corporations, didn't want to spend the money on that, so that was fought for years and years, and most of the time didn't get anywhere with it. By, let me think of my dates here, late 70s, people were starting to think maybe we ought to move it out from all these different locations. And we weren't the only town. We were the biggest. And I remember picking up I was working for the Daily Sentinel in early 80s, and I picked up a hitchhiker. I was down in Durango. I don't remember what store I was working on. And this couple were hitchhiking up this way, and they wanted to know where I was from. And I said Grand Junction. They said, "Oh, we just read that Newsweek article about Grand Junction. Isn't that the town that glows in the dark?"
Oh.
I mean, that's the national reputation we had for a while. The start of the tailings removal coincided with the oil shale bust. So you had all of a sudden, on Black Sunday, a couple thousand people right away, and eventually more, a bigger pool of unemployed men and ladies. And about the time that really started to hit us economically, and housing prices dropped, a lot of empty storefronts and things like that. Well, about that time, people started thinking maybe that's when we ought to do the oil or the tailings removal. So that helped us economically and cleaned up, I think, maybe 80-90%. I don't know for sure how much was removed. I do know there's still some places that have it around, and it shows up on your property deed, I think.
Yeah, you can pull your mill tailings report.
Yeah.
So do they ship some of those mill tailings to Utah in Moab?
No, they were all shipped to what's called the Shaney Reservoir site, which is south of Whitewater.
Okay.
They pretty interesting process. They put them on the train down there by the sugar beet factory, and then the train took them as far as about a half mile south of Whitewater. And then the Shaney Reservoir Storage, I don't remember the full Department of Energy name, Shaney Reservoir, old dry reservoir on the east side of 50 towards the Grand Mesa, about 8 or 10 miles south of Whitewater. So then they would transfer the tailings from the train cars to trucks because the train tracks started to follow the Gunnison River.
Oh, okay.
And so they had to truck the last, I think it's 8 or 9, 10 miles, and deposited them there. And they're still sitting out there under a big cover, and there's guards out there making sure nobody.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But you can't see it from 50, and it's locked gates and things like that. But they're watching it, make sure nobody steals the tailings. I don't know why they would do that.
Did they use horses?
Horses, yeah. There was some oxen. Sometimes they used mules. Are you talking about pulling the vehicles or horseback riding?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did that a lot. Especially that we were talking about this toll road that you can see in Tibet Canyon. You can still see the rocks there. That was a horse. It's about wide enough for 2 horses or a skinny stagecoach. We had, blacksmiths. It would go shoe your horse, and they'd shoe your oxen. We know sometimes people coming from what is today's Gunnison area, if they had a covered wagon, they would use mules more often, or if it was a real heavy load, they'd use oxen because oxen could pull a bigger load, but they were slower. So it depends on, what you were doing. But they use horses.
And why did they not grow a lot of crops?
Too dry. So we average about 8.5 inch of moisture a year. So that's rain and snow. So, right now on top of the Grand Mesa, I think I don't know what they have, 6 feet or so of snow. You look out here, how much do we have? And how much rain do we get in the summer?
Not a lot.
Yeah, that's why. And it's probably a little bit better back 130 years or so ago. There's a little more crop growing, but not a lot. So that's partly why. And that's partly why fruit became so popular. Fruit was a little easier to grow with less water than, say, corn or grain or something like that. But that's also a problem with the weather. For example, in 1963, Fruita had a lot more fruit. That's why it's called Fruita. And that's why the streets are named after fruit. There's peach in Alberta and apple, and I don't remember what all their streets named out there. And in late December of 1962, it was about 45 or 50 degrees. And then about 2 weeks later, it got down to 40 below in Palisade. It got down to about 41 or 42 below here. And it got down to about 45 or 46 below zero around Fruita and Loma and Mac. And that sudden shift in temperature froze the sap solid in the trees. And people have told me it sounded like shotgun blasts going off at night because the sap froze and expanded and burst off the tree trunk. So that's primarily why we don't have much fruit down around Fruita anymore.
And does any other places mine uranium?
It's coming back. There's more places that are possibly looking at nuclear power plants. So there might be a more call for uranium maybe in the next few years. On and off over at Green River, Utah, the Utah folks have been looking at possibly building a small power plant there. And it looks more likely like a couple of small nuclear power plants might be built in southern Wyoming, here north of us. So to do that, they would need uranium. And we got some of the best uranium deposits in the world here in western Colorado and eastern Utah. So could be.
So one last question. You told us how Grand Junction got its name. You told us how Fruita got its name.
Oh.
How did Palisade get its name?
It was originally called Rapid Creek. The creek coming down there by the bottom of the bicycle trail. That's Rapid Creek. That was where they had their first post office. Then it was Palisades, apostrophe S, from the castle-like cliffs, being a palisade-like, formation. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's called. And then they took the S off. I don't know when. But,
okay. So
now it's just Palisade.
Okay.
Originally we had, we had more little places that people don't realize, like Appleton, Roan, where it was a stockyard down here on the River Road, and that had a little post office for a short time. A lot of little locales like that. If you look up the post office lists in the 1890s, early 1900s, we had about 25 post offices in the county. 2 or 3 up on Glade Park. A lot of them were near schools and were kind of like a central little area for local ranchers, something like that. There was Heiberger up on your way to Vega Reservoir. You go right past the remnants of that little place. People don't realize, you didn't want to go into town because it was too long on horseback or wagon road to go get your mail. So they'd set up a little post office in different locales.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time to sit down with us. I feel like we didn't even answer half the questions that we had, so we'll have to do another one.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you for your time.
You bet.